So good afternoon, everybody. I will give you a short introduction to Chesar. I have about 40 minutes, so it will be really high level, but I hope it gives you a flavor of what it is and whether you may be curious to know more about it. So I'll first introduce a bit what is Chesar and the assessment workflow in Chesar. I'll do a very, very short demo, just that you get a feel, and then a bit more information. So what is it, Chesar? Chesar, in fact, stands for Chemical Safety Assessment and Reporting Tool. It's an application that we developed to support registrants for both carrying out the chemical safety report and submitting it as part of the registration dossier and generating the exposure scenario for communication to be annexed to the SDS. It's an application which exists in two versions, desktop application and server version, so in distributed environment. It's free of charge and it's relatively easy to install. Just a bit of background. I assume more or less all of you know that, but under REACH, the key things is that you have to fulfill your information requirement for the various endpoints and to derive your hazard assessment conclusions, so the classification and labeling, and also deriving the NLs, PNEX, etc. And you have to describe your uses and identify the information on the conditions of use. Now, for substances which are classified as hazardous, or which are more than 10 tons, you have to carry out an exposure assessment. An exposure assessment consists in defining an exposure scenario, which is describing the conditions for safe use. And this is based on exposure estimation and risk characterization. So doing this exercise, if you find out that you cannot, at first sight, describe the conditions for safe use, so have a risk characterization which is okay, then you probably have to iterate both either on the hazard side, so getting more information on the hazard, or finding better information on the use of the substance. Once this is done and you manage to describe your conditions for safe use, so once the chemical safety assessment is performed and okay, then you have to generate the chemical safety report that you have to submit to the authorities as part of the registration dossier, and you have to communicate the information on the substance properties and on the conditions of safe use via the extended SDS. Very basic. Just a bit more complex description of this workflow. I will not read it, but just to tell you, the guidance D, which is on exposure assessment, has been updated. It's now in its final stage, so you can see the close to final draft on our website, and the publication is expected in probably early July, in July this year. So if you have a bit of more interest, you may have a look at this guidance part D, which gives the overview on the assessment, exposure assessment. Now, we have developed Chesar with a view to really IT support the work by registrant for carrying out their chemical safety assessment. As I said already, the idea is to combine information on the substance properties and on the use information. So when you prepare a registration dossier, you have to report all your substance properties into Euclid, and Chesar interacts with Euclid that it can import directly all the substance information, which is reported in the endpoint summaries of Euclid. Then to report the information on the uses, what we advise or hope, I mean, what we think is the most efficient way is to find use maps which have been developed by sector organizations. Use maps package consists in use descriptions, so the sectors describe the key uses in the sector, together with key main conditions of use, which are included in what is so-called SPERCs for the environment, SCEDs for the consumer, and SWEDs for the worker. We are fully aware that not all sectors have developed use maps, some are being developed. There is, at the moment, quite some work being done in this domain within what is so-called the exposure scenario CSR roadmap, which is an activity carried out with industry, ECHA, and member states. It is foreseen, there is a new web page on ECHA website, if you type use map, where it is foreseen that this information will be made available on ECHA website from sectors, and even in Chesar format. So the idea is that there is an IT exchange format so that this information can be uploaded directly in Chesar. If not available, then registrants have to describe their uses themselves. So then to carry out the CSA on the basis of these two types of information, there will be a need for exposure estimation data. This may be obtained either by tools, exposure tools, which are what we call built-in Chesar, and this is the ECHA Tier A tool. And the uses for the environment. It can be also obtained via what we call external exposure tool, meaning that the assessment is done by any kind of other tool and then reported back in Chesar. This may be reported either manually or with an exchange file. We are working with some tool owners so that they generate Chesar export files. And there's also the possibility to use measured data. So with this, it's possible to carry out the chemical safety assessment. And once the process is finished, then the CSR is generated, and there is an automated export from Chesar to Euclid, so that the use description part, section 3.5 of Euclid, and an extract of the exposure assessment can be populated in Euclid. So with this, the registrant has all his data in his Euclid database for his registration. He can submit it to ECHA, meaning that the member states and ECHA, so the authorities, have access to the data, and they can use it for further prioritization or further work for further regulatory processes. This information is then filtered and disseminated to the public. From the registrant's perspective, there is the second route, where he has to generate the exposure scenario for communication, which he will attach to the SDS. There has been an initiative from industry to develop an IT exchange format for such information. It's called ESCOM XML, and you can find all the information on CEFIC website. And we intend to be able to generate the information in the same exchange format. So as you can see, all these blue arrows mean IT transfer of data for more efficiency and less error prone. How does Chesar works? Chesar works with a guided workflow in what we call boxes. So you have 5 key boxes for the work and 2 supportive boxes. So the first one is all about substances, so importing the data from Euclid, looking at the information, managing some information. It's all about the substance properties. The second box is about uses, so describing all the uses for that substance so that they can later on be assessed in box 3. So box 3 is all about exposure assessment. Box 4 is about generating the CSR and exporting the information to Euclid. And box 5 is about generating the exposure scenario for the SDS. You can navigate through the different boxes back and forth. It's a very iterative tool, but at least the different type of action and purpose is clearly differentiated. There are 2 additional boxes which are to support this workflow. The one is what we call the library, which is to import information, for example, generated by sector associations, use maps, or even the standard phrases as developed by the ESCOM project, and to keep them in your library so that you can use them for several substances, for several assessments. The last one is about managing the users. This is only interesting for the distributed version, so the server version of Chesar, in case you work in a big company and you want to share data. Another view of the assessment workflow in Chesar with a bit more details. So starting again from Euclid, reporting all the physical chemical properties which impact on the fate of the substance, for example, and the result of the hazard assessment for the environment, for human health, and the PBT status. So this is all reported in Euclid and then imported in Chesar from Euclid in this box 1. It can also be it's also possible to import and export full assessment from one Chesar instance to another Chesar instance. Then describing the uses in what we call the lifecycle structure. So all the uses can be described in Chesar, and there is a need to assign tonnage to carry out an environmental assessment. Again, it's also possible to import and export part of this, for example, importing use maps from registrant. Once you have those two key information, you have to carry out the exposure assessment. For this, exposure assessment can be of quantitative or of qualitative nature, depending on the type of hazard. If you have a DNL or a PNEC, then you have to ensure that the exposure is below the DNL or the PNEC. If you don't have that, for example, local effects, thermal irritancy, then you have to carry out the qualitative risk characterization. This is something which is not that straightforward, but I mean not so complex either. But this is done in both three, and this is done together with the support of all the information you have in your own library, because you can then reuse elements that you have used that you have for one assessment to another assessment. Once you have done your exposure assessment, you can generate the CSR, section 9 and 10, and you can also export the information to Euclid and generate the full CSR. Finally, you extract the exposure scenario for communication, which is then communicated to the downstream user. So this is in brief the various steps of the assessment. I don't know how many of you are familiar with chemical safety assessment. We all are aware this is not such a simple process, but we hope that Chesar really facilitates the work and supports the registrant in carrying it out. What I will do now, I will do a short demo live to illustrate a bit those different boxes so that you get a feel. Oops. So Chesar works in a browser. It's not an application which works on a server. I mean, it doesn't require internet. You have to install it on your computer or on your company server, but it works with a browser. It's a web application. As you see, there are different boxes which are on the top, and you can navigate from one to the other, and the two supportive boxes. Just before forgetting, telling you that there is help text embedded in Chesar, and we really advise users to have a look. It's divided for each page, so we try to make it relatively short. It's not always that short, but relatively short, to really help you working with the application. In box 1, as I said, it's all about substance management. So the key thing is to import the substance from Euclid. I will not demonstrate it now. The idea is that you search in your Euclid database directly from web service, and then you select the substance you want to import. I will not do it because it may take a few, 1 minute or so, so it's not needed. Once you have imported your substances from Euclid or imported Chesar files, then you have them all in your Chesar database, and you have to select the one you want to work on. What you can see then in box 1 is the different information that you have imported from Euclid. So for example, you will see the various key properties of your substance. This is synchronized with Euclid. So you see general information on physical properties, biodegradation, bioaccumulation, abiotic degradation, absorption coefficient, so the different information which are imported from Euclid. You will also see some information on how the substance behaves based on the substance property. This is calculated from uses, but it gives you a feel on what may be, how your substance will behave in the environment. So this is giving you the percentage which are released to water, air, and sludge and degraded based on the substance properties as calculated by uses in a biological STP. It's probably useful information to look at. Then you will also have this schema hazard and the hazard conclusion and the scope of assessment, which is reported in Euclid. So it's divided in environment, workers, consumer, and via the environment. So for example, for the environment, you see the different PNECs that you have reported, and you see, side to this, the risk characterization type, meaning it's to help you identifying the scope of the exposure assessment. For the environment, it's usually quantitative risk characterization that you have to do because you have PNECs. But for example, in this case, for predators, there is no potential to cause toxic effects if accumulated via the food chain, so there is no need to carry out risk characterization. So this column on the hazard conclusion is coming from Euclid, but this column on the scope of exposure assessment, risk characterization type, is generated by Chesar itself. It helps you understanding what you have to do. For the workers, it's usually a bit more mixed. So you may have, it's also by the type of effects, and you may have DNLs, in which case you have to carry out a quantitative risk characterization. But you may also have, for example, qualitative effect, for example, for local effect on dermal, as I said, and then you have to carry out a qualitative risk characterization. And for some route and type of effect, you may have no hazard identified, in which case no need to carry out an exposure assessment. So in this respect, Chesar helps you to really scope down what you need to do in terms of exposure assessment. Then once you have all this information on your substance properties, you go to box 2, and there are different ways. You have to describe all your uses. There are different ways of doing this. Either you describe use by use, so you add the use, you have the different life cycle stage that you can select. You select the one which is relevant, and then you provide the information to describe it. I will not do it for the moment. Or you can import a life cycle tree which has been generated either by a sector association, a use map, or by a colleague, or that you had done before for another substance, which is what I have done, meaning that I have imported my life cycle tree, and you see here the different uses. So here I have manufacture, formulation, use at the industrial site, use at widespread use by professional, consumer uses. This example which I show you corresponds to what is we call the CSR illustrative example, which is available on our website, which we have done a few years ago. We will update it soon and make it available also as a Euclid 6 and Chesar 3 files. For each use is described by a number of what so-called contributing activities, so some for the environment and some for workers, or when it comes to consumer use, some for the environment and some for consumer. So this is really about describing the uses. Then once you have described them, you have to assess them, and for this you have to go to box 3. The way it works is that you have to describe the conditions of use. So I selected now an environmental contributing scenario, and I have two choices to describe my conditions of use. Either I describe it myself, or I select a SPERC, which has been developed by a sector association. If I do it myself, and this is a worked out example already, I have to set up the different values for the different conditions of use, and I can add any new condition of use from my library. The next step is to estimate the release. If I had selected the SPERC, this would be automatically pre-filled with the numbers. If not, I have to select myself the release estimation method. It can be ERG-based, it can be an estimated release factor, or a measured release rate. If it's ERG-based, I have nothing to do. The numbers are coming from the ERGs. If I have estimated release factors or measured release rate, I have to report some numbers. I can, of course, also report some explanation on the releases, which will be part of the CSR. Once I have done the release, then there is the exposure estimation part. For the environment, there is a tool which is most of the time used, which is uses, and then it provides automatically all the exposure estimates for the different compartments. Nevertheless, you also have the choice to use other data set, for example, with other tools. It's rarely, but it happens that other tools are used for the environment assessment, and you may use measured data. So all combination is possible. Just to show you how it works for workers, it's the same principle. Maybe I'll start with one which is not assessed at the moment. So if I start, I have selected the workers contributing activity. The principle is the same. I will start with hardly any condition of use for which I have to report data. I can add any condition of use relevant for my case. And I will have to carry out an exposure assessment. I can use the TRA workers. I can use other tools. I can use measured data. Other tools, I will either have to report manually the output, or if there is a Chesar file available in those tools, it's possible also to import those files. If I run the TRA workers, which is the one embedded in the tool, I can select if I wanted to all the routes and type of effect. There are default values for all the inputs, but I may change it depending on what I know on the standard conditions of use for this use. So for example, I know that there is local exhaust ventilation and thermal protection, for example. I can put some specific parameters related to the TRA if I need. If I don't need, I don't do it. And I can save. And I will get my exposure estimates and the risk characterization ratio, which is automatically calculated from the DNLs I have. For the workers, I will have to do potentially other type of risk characterization. I have to do the qualitative risk characterization also. In this case, there are several ways of doing it. You may check that your conditions of use which you have reported are sufficient to ensure that the risk is controlled for those routes, or and you may report, and you have to report some information about it, that explanation, and then the risk is set as control. We have implemented in Chesar 3 a number of ways to facilitate this work. For example, for the local effect, if you go to the hazard conclusion in box 1, and you have the concentration limit for thermal effect, local effect, and for eye effect, for example. I save this. Then all the contributing scenario for which the concentration is below this concentration will be considered as safe. So if I take an example, oops. So in this case, I have 5%. Then in the risk characterization, I can see that all the qualitative risk characterization are considered controlled without me doing anything. A second thing which we have implemented in Chesar 2 is the possibility to do actions for a large number of contributing scenario in one go. For example, I know that for my professional uses, I don't have 5% of the substance in the mixture, but I have only 1%. So for example, I will edit. I can select for which contributing scenario I want to modify this value. So for example, I decide that for my for this use, which is a use at industrial site, and for this use, which is used by professional, instead of 5%, it's 1%. I change it once, and it will be changed in all of them. So if I go back to any of them, I will see that it has been changed to 1%. So I can't do much more now in a few minutes, and I must say that's a bit challenging to explain the chemical safety assessment process in 5 minutes. But I hope you will get the feel that this is relatively organized way of doing it, and hopefully that this is not too complex. The next step is then to go to box 4, and 2 actions. The one is to export all your use information and extract of exposure assessment to Euclid, and the other one is to generate either section 9 and 10 of the CSR or the full CSR. If you are connected to Euclid at the same time, the system will take all the information from Euclid to generate section 1 to 8, and then add section 9 and 10 generated by the information from Chesar. The idea, and that's really our aim, is that there is no need to further refine manually the CSR once generated. So all the information is stored in the Chesar database, modify something in the tool, and that, so that then you only have to press the button. It's not fully yet implemented for the current version. It will be done for the next version, but the idea is that we will have the CSR structure, section 9 and 10 here, and on the right side, you will see the CSR as it stands in an HTML format, so that you can modify it online, save it in your database for the next time, and then just generate. So this is something that will be done in the next version. Finally, the last stage is to generate the exposure scenario for communication. If you have done everything more or less properly before, then normally you hardly have anything to do. You can just generate your SDS, you decide for which of the uses you want to do it, and it generates the SDS for communication. You may nevertheless wish to adapt some of the things. So the SDS, the exposure scenario for the SDS is composed of 4 sections per exposure scenario. There is a part which is called the structured short title. This is a work which has been done by industry to harmonize the way of having a short title for the exposure scenario, so that it's easy to read from the table of content and easy to find. We have implemented the solution, which is I think it's published on DUC website. You can find it in our help text. Yes, you find the link where you can find all the information. And there is a section 3 on exposure estimation, where there is very little which is to be done because it's all coming from the assessment, and some guidance for the downstream user potentially if you need to put something specific. Otherwise, for the conditions of use, which is section 2, it's done contributing scenario by contributing scenario, and everything is coming automatically from the chemical safety assessment, but you may want to customize for your case. I will not go to the last 2 boxes because they are just support boxes. You will just see that in the library you can import conditions of use, perks, CADs for the moment, and the standard phrases, in particular from the ESCOM, which you can find on our on CEFIC website in Chesar format. So this is more or less the short demo, Chesar in 10 minutes. I will just resume with the presentation. Not sure I've managed to convince you, but really the idea is that with Chesar, we aim at support consistency. 2 key elements: consistency between Euclid on substance properties and uses, which is part of your registration dossier, and the chemical safety assessment, the chemical safety report, so that all this makes sense together. And consistency between the information for the authorities, so as part of the CSR, and the information for the supply chain in the exposure scenario for communication. So Chesar really supports that the same information, the information is synchronized in all respects. Second key aim is standardization. As you have seen, we have an approach based on a workflow, so which helps everybody to approach the assessment in a similar way. Also, to use sector or cross-sector developed element as input in a similar way, so use maps or standard phrases. This also helps in doing the things if you have, for example, for several substances. And standardized CSR format and standardized e-exposure scenario for communication format. We think that all this standardization helps everyone to find back the information, because chemical safety assessment, chemical safety report is usually a big document, a bit complex process. So, but if it's well structured, if it's always done in a similar way, it's really helpful. Also, what we have been working a lot on, and this thanks to the support also of industry, which have given us a lot of ideas and feedback, is to support really industry carrying out an efficient chemical safety assessment. So to reuse information across substances, for example, with the integrated exposure estimation tool, like ECHA TRA uses, I mean, all the figures, the numbers comes automatically. It's relatively easy. Also, the fact that you can do some actions at substance level, meaning that you do something and it's valid for all the uses, but on the other hand, you also have the flexibility to do something at use level, so at exposure scenario specific level. All the documents are automatically generated. The chemical safety report, the exposure scenario for communication, it's only one click in the end, and you have all your formatted document. A lot of IT exchange data, import, export. I mean, if you spend a bit of time, you will see a lot of import, export buttons, which facilitates the work. And of course, one of the key aim of Chesar is to facilitate updates, because as everything is in one database, I mean, if you have some, for example, new information on your substance, then you enter it in Euclid, you resynchronize, and for example, all your exposure estimates done with the plugin tools, it's just recalculated in one go. You don't have anything to do. If you have to add one contributing scenario or one use, or if you have to change a condition of use, you do it only this part, and your full assessment remains updated. So it's really, we hope, helpful in maintaining your chemical safety assessment. So this is what the reason why, and the aim with which we have developed Chesar. We hope we reach it. Just a bit more information. As Vasilios already said it, we will release Chesar 3 on the 21st of June. It will nevertheless be made available a bit earlier to participants on the webinar, which is also planned on the 21st of June. So if you are interested in having more information, just look at this, go to this link and register to the webinar. The idea is that it will be a 3 hours demo in the beginning, so a bit more than what I've done now, a bit more deep, and then a possibility for Q&A in the afternoon after a short break. And in order for you to get prepared, we'll make the tool available to those who have registered to the webinar a bit earlier. Be nevertheless aware that this version that we will release before the 21st of June should not be used to communicate with Euclid 6. For this, there will be a need for a patch to Euclid, which will be released also on the 21st of June. So you can work with migrated data. We will also, for those who don't have migrated data from Chesar 2, we'll provide you a Chesar substance to be able to play with it, but don't try to interact with Euclid. It works in a number of situations, but not all the time, so you should not try it out. We plan to organize some training to trainers in Q4. More information will come later, and you can find information on our Chesar website. It will be updated at the release times on 21st of June. If you are interested to get some information, you could subscribe. It's here. Subscribe. You just give your email address, and you will from time to time, not too often, I mean, I must say even not very often, but from time to time when there is key things, we will inform you. You will receive an email that something has been put on our Chesar website. I think this is all what I could do in this short time. I hope it gave you some kind of flavor, whether you want to know more about it. Thank you for your attention.